All right, we are back. If you're not seeing us, make sure you refresh. Right. Ross is reminding everybody, remember to refresh. Just make sure everybody's hearing me and seeing me. Everybody hearing and seeing? First question I got was a good one. It's about the cerebellum, which I have covered in some other areas. But let's just review the cerebellum a little bit too. It's a good point. The cerebellum really controls posture and balance and coordination of voluntary movements. It's right there underneath the occipital lobe. So it's commonly called, our animal brain too. That's like our instinctive nature lives there. It allows different muscle groups of the body to act together, and that's what produces coordinated fluid movement. That's why that one test for the cerebellum is that test where you put one foot in front of the other, and it's like the sobriety test for DUIs when you get pulled over. What they make you do, like walk a straight line like this. Well, you do that with your eyes open, then close your eyes and try it. And if your balance is really off, that's a sign that you may have some issues with the cerebellum. So it's really important with posture, balance, motor control, in integration of stuff too. So it's also important for language and language integration, and it plays a role in, like, they're learning more and more. Actually, it's involved in memory. They didn't think it was, and now we've discovered that it's involved in different aspects of memory, particularly like integration of memory and episodic memory. So like remembering the sequence of things, stories, and recall of that sort of thing. Yeah, good question. And one of the things we know from we were talking about this on Monday, we were reviewing some of the stuff from the Hashimoto Summit. There's two things. The brain, we know that gluten antibodies attack the cerebellum, and also that TPO and thyroid, if you have TPO antibodies, apparently they also can impact the cerebellum. And gluten can cause real problems. Something called gluten ataxia, which is you lose your balance from too much gluten because of its impact on the cerebellum. So, great question. What other questions do we have, people? So no gluten, no smoking, and no gluten. Like, I need you to know that. Any other questions you have? Any other thoughts? Comments? Ideas? Suggestions? I just thought it was really cool how it's all related to our personality. You have dominance in those certain areas. It can really impact you. How many different types of depression there are too from all those different things. I thought that was interesting too. Yeah, you can ask your questions. There's a chat window here. If you guys aren't seeing it, it's right to the left. Right side as you're facing the screen. To the left, it would be over here. One of those sides. You can chat your question to me. Any question. We talked about the cerebellum. I'm glad you brought that up too. Thank you. Balance. It's all about balance. Well, here we go. Can you elaborate on the dopamine insulin resistance connection? Yeah. I mean, the one issue in particular is, dopamine. If you're deficient in dopamine, it can make that sugar craving, all the more intense, because part of what you're doing there in getting the dopamine, or in striving to get dopamine, is you need something to stimulate it. And sugar, just like we were talking about those other drugs like cocaine or methamphetamine, or nicotine, sugar does the same thing in releasing dopamine. So if you're a person deficient in dopamine, or you tend to be a person who's really dopamine dependent, that can make sugar craving more intense. And insulin resistance really results from that over a period, usually a long period of time or a substantial period of time of too much sugar. And what your body ends up doing is basically says, okay, enough sugar, we can't deal with this anymore, so you get this insulin receptor resistance. It doesn't, body basically just lowers the threshold, and you have to have that much more sugar in order to get sugar into the cells, because you've been doing too much all the time. So there's definitely a relationship there between sugar consumption and dopamine regulation. So by helping to stimulate dopamine, it can actually lower some of those. By helping to nourish dopamine, it can actually lower some of those sugar cravings, dopamine and carbohydrate cravings. Great question. I do remember working in a certain order with the brain, chemical balance, dopamine first, acetylcholine, etc. That's a great question too. Yeah, I mean, I think you want to take a look. It's one of the reasons we have that brain assessment form that hopefully all you guys, I know some of you we've met and talked about it, gone over it. If we have not yet done that, please do that with me. Make sure you set up a time. Make sure you go over that. The whole point of that really is to figure out what neurotransmitter areas you may have weaknesses, and those are where you want to start. If you're deficient or have too little in certain areas, that's the place you want to begin and try to get that the balance there. I know for myself, it seems the dopamine and acetylcholine are the two that I seem to need, and that made a big difference for me when I started applying that and doing those. I found in nourishing, I'm very sensitive to GABA. If I take something that's a GABA stimulant, I'm out. I don't really need that much. And the same with serotonin. If I take serotonin things, I don't feel good. It makes me feel strange, and it's like we're talking about too much serotonin. It makes me feel uncomfortable and not myself. So, some of those you may not even need to stimulate anymore. So that's part we want to assess that. We want to try and figure that out. Great questions, though. Excellent questions. Yes, if you're not able to get to the chat, if you're on an iPad, you can shoot Ross an email over at ross@itctech.net and ask him questions. Those are good questions. Yeah, so again, we had all those. We got the different neurotransmitters. We had the other issues we talked about, like sugar. Got to be careful with sugar balance in the brain. But that's the other thing. Back to the insulin-resistant question. If you become insulin-resistant, that means your brain is not able to get as much sugar because it's not absorbing it. And the brain is a huge consumer of sugar. About 60% of our sugar consumption goes to the brain. But it's not like you can just hammer sugar and your brain will be happy. It doesn't work that way. Your body's always trying to balance, always trying to do this state of homeostasis, balance, keeping things in balance. So too much sugar, the body just says, okay, insulin resistance, less is going to be absorbed. And what happens to it? All that sugar becomes fat, really. It ends up in your liver in the form of triglycerides and other fats. So more sugar is not always the answer, even though we need it. And another thought on the brain chemical balance too. I mean, I think we definitely want to work on exercises in all these different areas of the brain too, right? It's not just about stimulating the dopamine and acetylcholine. It's also about exercising. Those are just doing things to stimulate the brain. And one of the simple things to do is to do things you're not good at. If you're really bad at math, like doing math is going to help your brain, because even though it's kind of counterintuitive. How does the insulin resistance pattern get broken? Great question. Yeah, so one of the reasons why I'm such a big fan of the autoimmune paleo diet is because it does this. It basically, traditionally, not traditionally, like historically or evolutionarily, maybe a better way to put it, we grew up, our ancestors grew up in a pretty calorie poor environment. Like, think about if you're a nomadic tribesman living in the plains of Africa, which we all basically came from. That's what we evolved from, that type of life. Well, there's not a lot of fat around. There's not a lot of sugar around, really. Like occasionally you'd stumble on a tree that when it had fruit one time a year. The rest of the year, you're not going to have a lot of sugar. So this is kind of like the paleo concept, is that we didn't have a lot of grains back then. We didn't have a lot of fruits back then. So the diet, which is primarily of meat and good fats, vegetables, and fruit's good, but not an excessive amount of fruit. This ends up converting your body back into what we originally were, which is a fat burner. Our bodies were designed to really preserve fat and preserve sugar because it was hard to come by. That's what we have. We evolved with that kind of body. The problem is, in the modern world, it's like there's just and especially in America, there's so much sugar. So this is why there's so much obesity, because all this sugar is just getting converted into fat. The body, that's the body's natural, that's what it does with it. So by changing this type of diet where we cut out all the grains, we take out all the refined sugars, we take out all these processed foods, we take out a lot of sources of these sugars, we kind of go back to being a fat burner. And this takes a little time. That's why we want to stick with this for a period of time. But if you really stick with the diet, you'll convert. You will go back to being a fat burner more than a sugar burner. So yeah, that's the reason another reason, it's a great anti-inflammatory diet also, but it's also really good for resetting this insulin resistance pattern. Great question. How do I quit smoking? Is there something I can take to ease the transition? Because I almost drove my husband crazy when I tried to quit. Great question. Well, there are the nicotine patches, of course. That's for gradual withdrawal. Part of it could be, I'm a big fan of people with addiction of 12-step programs. I know there is a 12-step program for smokers too. Any sort of addiction, that's really good. E-cigarettes are, yes, another option. The jury's still out on e-cigarettes. We really don't know how safe they are yet. So I don't know that I'd be so gung-ho on those. And it's still the issue of the nicotine addiction, right? And that's, what is that at its base? That is stimulating dopamine. So maybe working on dopamine too, and getting some dopamine and nourishing and feeding the dopamine may help you with the withdrawal process. But if you really want to quit, I'm a big fan of 12-step programs for addiction. I think they're some of the most successful because you get support. Ross is clearly a, yes, e-cig person. Watermelon, chocolate, coffee. Okay, we see what's going on here. We see how it is. Yeah, but you can drive other people crazy, true, when you're trying to go through that. Not easy. Cool, great questions. Great questions, people. Yeah, but that insulin resistance, yeah, the diet is super helpful for that. Where do I find a 12-step program for smoking? Good question. I think you could go, I would Google that, go online. I know there's like a, like there's AA for alcoholics, NA for like Narcotics Anonymous. I know there's a Smokers Anonymous. So I bet if you Googled Smokers Anonymous, you could find a local chapter near you. I know they have them. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Any other questions? We'd be happy to answer them. Okay, thank you. You are welcome. 79509. 79501. Who's that? I already forgot who that is. Did you introduce yourself? No, we don't know yet. Cool. It's the Smoker Cessation Project, maybe. Can you speak about the adrenals and the thyroid connection? Yes, absolutely. A very important connection. I did a post on it. I think it's in the member area, actually. I did a whole blog post on this, a whole in-depth one. In fact, here I will find it for you. But there is a really big connection, and they both, both of them go through. We were talking before that hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid axis. Both of them go through there, so they're very closely. They really affect each other. Something goes wrong with one, it has a big impact on the other. And here I'm just finding a link to this lengthy post I did on these two. I want to share it with you. But we can touch on a few of the main issues right now. And, basically you have, with the thyroid, right, you have TSH is released, and then TSH causes T4 to be released from the thyroid. With the adrenals, it's ACTH, and that causes cortisol to be released from the adrenals. So it's kind of like similar to the thyroid. And there's all these different ways that the adrenals impact the thyroid. And one thing that's really, really interesting, like a lot of times they don't tell you this, which is just insane for me. Like if you read the warning labels of Synthroid or any of these thyroid replacement hormones, one thing it says is the person prior to going on thyroid, like here it is, patients with concomitant adrenal insufficiency should be treated with replacement glucocorticoids, or like cortisol basically, steroids, prior to the initiation of treatment with levothyroxine. So if you find, what they're saying is if this person has adrenal insufficiency, and they're not healthy adrenals, they should not even go on thyroid replacement hormone until that's fixed. It says that on the label, the warning label of Synthroid and levothyroxine. And then it goes on to say failure to do that may cause an acute adrenal crisis due to the increased metabolic clearance of glucocorticoids by thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone actually speeds up the clearance of these adrenal hormones. So the thyroid hormone has a big effect on what happens with the adrenals. Adrenal has a big effect on what happens in the thyroid. So if you don't have adrenal insufficiency, also it can affect the thyroid, by affecting thyroid hormone conversion, which is when we convert T4 to T3, which makes it so we can use it. Tissue uptake, meaning once it's converted, it's absorbed into the tissues, and then the way the thyroid responds. All of that can be impacted if the adrenals are out of whack. So if you can't get it, if it's not converting properly, it can't get into the cells, and it's not working. Thyroid hormone doesn't work. And the other thing to think about is like how the adrenals impact us on the autoimmune side, right? There's the whole, it has all these effects on the thyroid, but then there's all these effects also on the immune system. Like cortisol, it's an important anti-inflammatory. It affects that, and it can, if there's too much cortisol, it can weaken the immune response. That's why when you're on steroid therapy, corticosteroids for skin issues or some sort of inflammation in the body, over time that can totally suppress your immune system. It's a major thing you have to watch for. So adrenals being out of whack can mess with the immune system, can cause thyroid hormone resistance. Like we were talking about, the thyroid hormone can't get absorbed as well when the adrenals are out of whack. Too much cortisol prevents the conversion of T4 to T3. I talked about that already. It can cause other hormonal imbalances like excess estrogen if the adrenals are out of whack. When you have too much estrogen in the body, this can cause increased levels of thyroid binding globulin. Thyroid binding globulin is what thyroid hormone binds to. When it's bound to that, it's inactive, doesn't work. So the adrenals being out of whack, too high cortisol can cause too high estrogen, can cause too much thyroid binding globulin, and thyroid hormone doesn't work. So there's all these different ways that the adrenals can make the thyroid not work. So yeah, check out that article. That's a great question. Great question. I seem to have 4 brain sections affected, and I have lost the ability to organize, so I don't know where to start. Any suggestions, says Sheila? Sheila, let me review your thing. I think we went over it today, and I can't remember now already. See, my memory is shot. Again, we want to look, when we did that survey, I think about the survey kind of gives you grades, what percentage are impacted. I would look for the ones with the highest percentage in your answers, and those are the places to start. So the ones that show that you scored highest on in those different sections, those are the places we want to work on. Off thyroid meds now while healing the adrenals. Is it possible I may be able to stay off thyroid meds forever, or will I need to go back on after my adrenals have healed? Well, that's a great question. Sometimes healing the adrenals, for some people, that's the problem. It's not really a thyroid problem, it's more of an adrenal problem. So, it's hard to predict. We don't know, but what I would say is you're doing the right thing, working on those adrenals, getting them healed, and then once that happens, once you get some progress there, then reevaluate and see. If your energy levels improve and some of the other symptoms you have improve, then that may be an indication you don't have to. And you always got to look at your thyroid numbers too, of course. Look at the TSH, look at the free T3, free T4. But certainly, that is possible. It definitely is. I've seen that with a number of people. In fact, I had a woman who was a patient, and the reason she came to me was because she couldn't take thyroid hormone. She went through all this stuff. They diagnosed her hypothyroid. It was after pregnancy. So this is postpartum hypothyroidism, and then they thought she had Hashimoto's, so she came to me. And one of the first things she told me was, I can't take thyroid hormone. Every time I take it, she goes, I feel sick, I feel awful. And this is what we were talking about. That's why you get that warning with Synthroid levothyroxine. She was exactly that person. So when she took it, she had a severe reaction because her adrenals were out of whack. So we worked with her, And we got her adrenals taken care of. We did some salivary testing, got the cortisol balanced. Her DHA was a little low, got the DHA up. And she went back and did all her thyroid tests. Everything was normal. TSH was normal. All the other numbers were normal. And even the antibody numbers were normal. So it's definitely possible. She was a perfect example of the adrenals really being the issue and not the thyroid. Great question. And yes, it is possible. That's the thing too. That's right. That's why it's important for us to look at all these other systems too. We have to evaluate more than just the thyroid. It's more than a thyroid problem. And sometimes the origins of the problem are not the thyroid. Right? I mean, with Hashimoto's, of course, it's autoimmunity. A lot of times is the issue for many people too. Or an infection or something in the gut, or like we just talked about, the adrenals. All these other places it could be. Yeah. Excellent questions. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up in a few minutes. So let's get a couple more questions here. And then this will all be recorded and uploaded to the Save Your Brain video archive, so you'll be able to watch this again. Any questions you have, we will pick up. And also, if you think of other questions you want to ask me, you can ask me in the Facebook group or shoot me an email. If something comes up afterwards and you're like, oh, I want to ask that question, I forgot. We can do that too. Very good. Okay, any other questions? I know Ross is probably enjoying his vape e-cigarette right now as we speak. All of you are thinking questions. Is an antibody result of 250 considered high? Yeah, I mean, you got to look at the antibodies. Basically, are considered high if they're above. There's a laboratory range. Depends on which antibody you're referring to. The TPO antibodies, it's usually somewhere between 25 and 35. Above that, it's different with different labs. Thyroglobulin TGAB antibodies are a much lower number. It's usually sometimes above 1. Or more, just the way they calculate those. Yeah, so if it's above that range, that's considered high. I mean, 250 is not really, it's moderately high. I've had a number of people, myself included, when I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's, my TPO antibodies were 1200. So, just to give you a sense, cotton candy, yes, there you go. Can severe neck pain be attributed to Hashimoto? I mean, neck pain is definitely can be related to Hashimoto's. That's one of those things, maybe you're getting inflammation somewhere. Muscle pain in general, muscle and joint pain. Of course, your neck is a joint, or a series of joints, lots of little joints. So, neck can be. I periodically have neck issues myself. Again, whenever I have any kind of joint-related issues or muscle-related issues, always go back to the diet. Is there something in your diet you're eating that is causing a reaction? Almost always, when I have a joint-related problem, it's the result of some reaction I'm having to something I'm eating. Ross is having cotton candy flavored e-cigs. I don't even know where to start with that. It's just wrong on so many levels. All right. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap her up. like I said, check out those things I sent you. I will post them in the member area as well. Let's continue on the dialogue there. Any questions you have, please feel free to ask them. I will answer them. And I think we've met. I think Sheila and I met today. But anyone else, if you have not taken advantage of the free consult, please do, because we'll go over those things and I'll help direct you and guide you what we need to do. All right. Well, marvelous. Another great evening. Great questions. Love interacting with you guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, this will be recorded and uploaded to the archive, so you have a chance to watch it again if you like. Very good. Thank you for the levity, Ross. Yes, a little humor there. All right, people. I'm Marc Ryan, licensed acupuncturist and herbalist from Hashimoto'sHealing.com. Remember to be good, be kind, and always have compassion for everyone, including yourself. All right, people. We'll see you next time.